So this is a big deal, guys. This is a big deal. I know we do a lot of work on FOIA to expose government corruption, but here we had the government trying to destroy our social fabric and our constitutional systems that protect our civil rights. This is a good example of, if Judicial Watch doesn't do it, no one else will, is our successes in California. And I don't know if you've been watching the news or seeing the news, but I hope the news to date, and if not, this is going to be great news for you, is that Judicial Watch obtained a great victory for the rule of law, where a state court judge in California ruled that the California quota mandate requiring a certain number of women to be on boards of directors of corporations was illegal and unconstitutional. This came after a 28-day trial, our legal team deserves so much credit. I mean, one of the wonderful things about Judicial Watch and one of the pleasures and honors of my job is to be able to come and communicate and talk about the great work my colleagues are doing. You know, I know you see me on YouTube and on social media and such and on television, but remember, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not in court for 28 days defending the rule of law, questioning witnesses. It's Judicial Watch lawyers who are doing it. So we had a team of 4 lawyers there 24/7, practically speaking. And if you're a lawyer and you've been involved in a trial, you know how time consuming it is when a trial's in session. As the government lawyers just did everything they can to put anything they could on the record to try to save their indefensible case, which is that you can't require, and the government can't get in the business of requiring corporations to engage in sex discrimination. The court was having none of it. Her verdict eviscerated this critical theory approach. And there were all these specific all these specific hurdles. The government, in theory, there are possible ways that the government can engage in discrimination that's otherwise prohibited. But it's obviously very narrow. Like, for instance, if someone's been discriminated against, the government can take a position that person should be made whole again. And you could argue, well, that person's benefiting from their race. Well, they were punished because of their race. So that's the sort of really narrow case. You got discriminated against and you're made whole again. And that's not even really racial discrimination promoted by the government. That's just justice, right? But they didn't bother with any of that. And the court saw through it. The law requires, and this is what the law is, it's based on Senate Bill 826. It requires every publicly held corporation headquartered in California to have at least one director who self-identifies. So we didn't. I don't think we even got into the whole issue of identifying as a woman versus being a female, born female, on its board of directors by December 31st, 2019. So it required at least one by 2019, and also required corporation to have up to 3 such persons on their boards by December 31st, 2021, depending on the size of the board. So the bigger the board, the more women technically they needed to have in order to achieve this quota mandate. Judicial Watch argued that the quota, and we argued on behalf of taxpayers who have the right to challenge illegal expenditure of government funds for illegal purposes like this under California law. And we argued that the quota for women on corporate boards violates the Equal Protection Clause of the California Constitution. And the judge in that case, Maureen Duffy Lewis, Superior Court judge, a veteran judge, agreed and determined that SB 826 violates the Equal Protection Clause of the California Constitution and is thus enjoined. I want you to think about that phrase for a minute, because it's often bandied about. It's obviously an Equal Protection Clause in the California Constitution. The Equal Protection Clause is enshrined in the 14th Amendment. And you have to remember, it seems to me, it's useful to remember that the rights enshrined in these governing documents, such as the California Constitution or our federal Constitution, are rights that we have separate and apart from the Constitution. The Constitution recognizes rights we already hold. They're God-given rights, and I mean that literally. They're divine rights. They're divinely given rights that we have as human beings, children of God, to be treated equally before the law, without discrimination, equal protection of the law. And in California, the radical revolutionary left has decided to assault that core constitutional principle, that core human right of equal protection under the law. And if you lose the right of equal protection under the law, and I don't mean it's a violation of the explicit text, I'm just talking about it in principle. If we don't have equal protection under the law, that way lies dictatorship, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, you name it. The government is unchecked and uncontrolled. And the left thinks they can erase that concept of equal protection under the law using this critical theory approach. That there's systemic racism, systemic sexual discrimination, and that certain races or genders need to be raised up because because they have specific qualities. It's racism. It's racism, pure and simple. And in this case, sexism. Now, remember, this is the second case that we brought. The other case we brought was another crazy law. And I say crazy, I don't mean to say it's silly. I mean crazy meaning it was so outside our constitutional norms that went beyond the gender requirement for quotas to include include race, ethnic identity, and LGBT status. And in that case, a court that we pursued, and we didn't have a trial on that one, the court said we didn't even have to go to trial. He could make the decision on the papers and summarily dismissed or summarily affirmed our position that the law was unconstitutional, and also it's also a deadlock. And in this case, the judge issued a 23-page verdict, and I encourage you to read it because it's a scorcher. And she specifically found that the law's goal was to achieve general equity or parity. Its goal was not to boost California's economy, not to improve opportunities for women in the workplace, nor not to protect California taxpayers, public employees, pensions, and retirees. Frankly, none of those goals would have been appropriate to justify race discrimination. Further, the court found that putting more women on boards demonstrated that the legislator's actual purpose was gender balancing, not remedying discrimination. There's no compelling government interest in remedying discrimination in the board selection process because neither the legislature nor defendant could identify any specific purposeful, intentional, or unlawful discrimination to be remedied. We spent 28 days listening to them make up things as they go along. I mean, that's how I perceived it. And of course, the response of the government to this is, and the leftists who promote it is that, well, it's a shame we can't fix discrimination. The court said you didn't prove discrimination to be fixed. And also the court was offended by their approach. Let me quote you from this part of the ruling. This is one of my favorite parts. The court agreed with Judicial Watch and found that California, quote, had offered the testimony of stereotypical virtues of women, such as consensus builders and, quote, less risky behavior in investments. The court is unpersuaded by this offer of stereotypes for a justification of the law. So that's this is what they were doing. They were insulting the court and the intelligence of everyone who was following this, and of course citizenry, that somehow women bring these special qualities because they're poor or women. That's sexist. It's sexism, according to the left, right? All bets are off when it comes to justifying discrimination by this crowd. And the court found that we had presented persuasive evidence of illegality of activity. So it was unconstitutional and illegal what was going on. So this was a tremendous victory. It comes on the heels of another court decision, as I said. So there's two for two in California in terms of challenging the radical politicians' there's efforts to blow up our laws against anti-discrimination, to blow up our constitutional protections, to blow up our civil rights. And you can bet if we had lost these cases, I hate to think we would have lost, other states would have been out of the gate quickly trying to enforce quota mandates despite discrimination prohibitions in state and federal law to the contrary. This is the second decision finding without a doubt that quotas for corporations are unconstitutional. The radical left's unprecedented attacks on anti-discrimination law suffered another stinging defeat. And what's interesting is I saw a New York Times piece, which of course is a leftist publication. And the New York Times article was, oh, well, it's too bad this law went down, but don't worry, it did its job. It got more women on the boards. Well, how did it do that? Through discrimination. Think about the theory of the case here. If you require that certain slots be reserved for certain people, you're telling other people they can't apply. So if a slot is reserved for an LGBT candidate, a black straight female can't apply. Right? No males can apply unless maybe they're LGBT. And they may be given more weight than the female. It's just crazy town to engage in this type of discrimination. It's so pernicious and so divisive and so dangerous. This racial separatism, this encouragement of racial identity, sex identity, it's so divisive and it's so dangerous because they think the consequences are all positive. And we're seeing in our society every day, this racial division is deadly dangerous, deadly dangerous. In addition to being unconstitutional and illegal. And it blows out of the water the canard that the left is against discrimination. They are the biggest proponents of discrimination in modern American history. This was, for instance, the most blatant attack on our nation's anti-discrimination legal infrastructure in 50 years, 60 years. It would have blown up the 14th Amendment. California Constitution reflects the 14th Amendment understanding. So this is a big deal, guys. This is a big deal. I know we do a lot of work on FOIA to expose government corruption, but here we had the government trying to destroy our social fabric and our constitutional systems that protect our civil rights. Clear and present danger, clear and present danger. And Judicial Watch thwarted it through relentless and proactive court litigation. And I know the courts sometimes don't work the way we want them to work. We sometimes lose, but you only win if you're in court, trying to use them as they're designed to be used to apply and interpret the law in a rational basis, in a rational fashion based on the plain language of the laws at issue and what the law requires, and get a good result. And we did here. So 2 judges in California. Now remember, California is blue, right? And it's all these left-wingers who, no, we can't abandon the rule of law in California just because we think there are a lot of liberals that live there. Look, in Maryland, we won that case against the gerrymandering. Democrat legislature created this outrageously partisan map that denied fair access to Republican or fair representation to Republican or other voters. And a Maryland court judge said that's wrong. She was a Democrat, the judge. And then in New York, Democrats lost there. New York is a big blue state too. And New York said, look what happened in Maryland in Judicial Watch's case. So isn't it remarkable that Judicial Watch has had its most significant successes in at least this year? It's the what have I done for you lately, right? In California and Maryland, two of the blue states in the nation. It's those places where the rule of law probably needs the most protection, right? And where we should try to be most active. And more is coming. We've got more election integrity litigation and more. We're on continued battles exposing this critical theory revolution, this Marxist revolution that has overtaken our federal government, our military, our schools, and our corporate and media culture.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.